in our book, we really try and go to the primary sources and look at what were these experts recommending and to try and think what would happen if someone applied this consistently. And when you teach parents, and often they're told directly that they are agents of God, they act in God's stead with his authority, that they are to expect and even cultivate instant, unquestioning compliance, that this is their parental duty, because it helps teach children how to obey God down the road, or any number of reasons they're given. But this is kind of the path they're on. And that they should really enforce that through corporal punishment, that when parents practice that day in and day out, there's really not an off-ramp for that. That forms the parent-child relationship, both in what it requires of parents and what it leaves lacking.
Well, hey there, guys. Welcome to another episode of the Faith Roundtable, sister podcast to the Faithful Politics podcast. I, of course, am your host here. On the Faith Roundtable, I'm Josh Burtram, and our sister podcast, I'm the Faithful host. And here on this podcast, we explore all things Christianity in America. We look at the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. We talk to scholars and theologians and practitioners and thought leaders to talk about what's going on in Christianity in America and try to understand it. So guys, make sure you're tuning in and hitting the like button, subscribe, all that stuff, and we will thank you for it. Today, we're excited to have on the Faith Roundtable two authors, Marissa Franks-Burt. She had her Master of Arts of Theological Studies from Columbia International University. She's a novelist and editor, teacher, and co-host of At Home with the Lectionary podcast. She lives in a small town in Washington's, I'm not going to say this right, by the way, Snoqualmie, Snoqualmie, all right, Valley, and with her husband, 6 children, and a lot of books. And then we have Kelsey Kramer McGinnis. She has her PhD from University of Iowa. She's a musicologist, educator, and correspondent for Christianity Today. Big fans of Christianity Today on this podcast. I've had several of the writers from there. Writing on worship practices and Christian subcultures. She's an adjunct professor at Grandview University in Des Moines and previously worked at the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights. And we want to thank both of you guys for coming on today and talking about your latest book. See if I can get it into view and focus, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. And I'm glad to hear there's a myth to good Christian parenting, because I feel like I'm a terrible Christian parent. And every time my son is on a screen and then I try to get him off and he screams at me and we get into a fight. And then at the end, I'm like, I love you, buddy. God loves you too. Can we move on? And then, you know, maybe that's what makes me a good Christian parent, as I say, God loves you too. I don't know. What's going on with the good Christian parenting? Why did you guys write a book on this?
I think a book needed to be written about this, as you've just said. I think
yes, that makes sense.
I think there are a lot of Christian parents who want to know that they're doing things right. And that desire to do things right has made for a very profitable marketplace for Christian advice for a long time. But a lot of the books that populate that market are not particularly examined and are marketed in a number of ways that have been harmful and misleading. And it was time for a closer look at those, I think.
And a piece of that is really, freeing parents up from that pressure cooker that feels like, am I measuring up? Am I doing it right? Kind of an endless treadmill of how do I make sure I'm on the right path and my child's on the right path. So in our book, we kind of trace the history and development of some of these ideas, the surrounding historical and sociological and political influences on them. We look at the themes that reoccur across the decades, and we consider the impact. We surveyed a number of older parents and adult children reflecting back on their experiences to kind of see if we could make some observations. How did this play out for people in their family life?
I really love that. And the premise is great. You know, I grew up I was born in 85, grew up in the 90s, right? And I got the belt, dude. I mean, my parents spanked me, and I didn't think it was like, looking back, like I didn't think, oh, my parents were abusive. They're great people. They're loving people. I didn't like, I know some people might consider it that, and I'm not saying it's appropriate. What I'm saying is that I didn't feel that, and yet I see it, and like the idea, like I'm going to take a belt and I'm going to, and of course, like that comes from this idea of like James Dobson, and you guys have researched a lot more than me, so you can get into that. But I grew up in this kind of culture, and I got to say, it was mixed results, of course, right? It didn't really stop me from doing what I wanted to do. It kind of got me to stop talking about it and get really, really quiet and really, really sneaky and really, really secretive. And so I think for me, it didn't work. I think for a compliant child, maybe it might work. I don't know. But I would love to focus in, and you can comment on anything I've just said, by the way, but I'd love to focus in on this issue that you guys are driving at, this market-driven Christian parent ecosystem that takes anxiety and it converts it into formulas. What's going on there? Help us understand that sentence from the point of your book.
Yeah. No, that's exactly how I would describe the Christian parenting book market of the 1970s and beyond. So our book really starts in 1970 and treats the beginning of the era we're talking about as James Dobson's Dare to Discipline, published in 1970. And that is what made Dobson so successful, was his ability to kind of look around, survey the landscape, and tap into parental fears about what was happening around them and tell them that they could fix these problems by parenting differently, by instilling discipline and restoring order to the home and to the Christian family. And so since then, that has been kind of a well that Christian parenting writers and teachers go back to again and again, is what are the parental fears and how can we convince parents that if they do things this way, they can not only help their families, but actually like treat this as a political project of fixing society at large, right? You can look out and see civil unrest. Well, that's because parents of the 50s and 60s didn't discipline their children enough. You can fix that problem, parents, by disciplining your children. And that still happens again and again. I mean, I think we're seeing a weird resurgence in the public discussion of spanking in certain like parts of the Christian internet right now. And I think it's partly in response to fear about turmoil around us. And it's a really effective way to sell things to parents.
Yeah, it kind of pulls on two levers, this really stirring up parental fears, which is understandable. Parenting is a vulnerable vocation. And often parents, especially in the intense early years of parenting, it can be overwhelming. Sometimes they are returning to faith. They're maybe new converts. They're looking for the Christian way to do things, or they're like, I know I don't want to do X element of what I was raised with, so they're looking for alternatives. So they're vulnerable to someone making authoritative claims. And it also taps into aspirational parental longings, which is why we like the terminology of myth. It says, look, if you get your child on the right path, if you train your child up in the way they should go, you can have kind of a guaranteed reassurance that when they're old, they'll not depart from it. They will walk with the Lord. They will have the life you envision for them. And some of these resources even make bigger claims, like you can build a generational legacy for generations. You can have a family legacy. So it really taps into understandable longings. And a lot of the resources pull on spiritual authority language. So for devout Christians who respect the scripture, who have a high regard for the Bible, to pick up a resource that is sort of saying, look, I have the godly way, the biblical way for you to parent. Wow, that taps into a lot of things at once. And it's very understandable why there was an eager market for it. In American media, there's such a strain of self-help. We're all quite accustomed to that terminology of how to find a hack to do something, how to find a better way to improve your life. And there's a number of things happening in the 70s and 80s in Christian communities that contribute to that as well, that we can get into if you like. But yeah, it made for some really appealing, we call them prosperity gospel parenting promises that you pick up these resources when your children are quite young and you rarely revisit them to examine them. But they were very formative for a lot of families because it set a pattern for family relationships.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You think about how these formulas, they probably worked in the short term in some way, right? I mean, like kids become compliant if they feel like they're going to be punished in a certain way. Again, at least ostensibly compliant, at least visibly in front of you.
Outwardly. Yeah.
They're doing other things, right? Or they're internally making commitments and vows like I'm done with this or whatever it is, especially as they get older, I would imagine. So they worked in the short time, but they often did what? What happened in the long term that made this so deleterious?
Yeah. So we often will say, how this played out for each individual family is going to vary, right? There isn't a one-size-fits-all parenting method. There isn't a one-size result. It's going to vary as much as each individual family, the temperaments of the individuals in the family culture, etc. That being said, we did see some patterns. In our book, we really try and go to the primary sources and look at what were these experts recommending and to try and think what would happen if someone applied this consistently. And when you teach parents, and often they're told directly that they are agents of God, they act in God's stead with his authority, that they are to expect and even cultivate instant, unquestioning compliance, that this is their parental duty because it helps teach children how to obey God down the road or any number of reasons they're given. But this is kind of the path they're on, and that they should really enforce that through corporal punishment, they're misled to believe that that's the biblical requirement in some instances. When parents practice that day in and day out, there's really not an off-ramp for that. Right? That forms the parent-child relationship, both in what it requires of parents and what it leaves lacking. Other skills to learn how to tolerate different viewpoints, to see the individuality of their child, or skills that would maybe help them prioritize connection over behavior are absent from these resources. So the focus really is on good behavior. So in the short term, exactly as you said, it may appear that it's working when children are young. Parents may believe what they're seeing of compliance as required compliance as authentic. But down the road, children do grow up and reclaim their God-given autonomy. And we found that it seemed that in evangelical families, a lot of times this might be delayed. It maybe didn't happen in the teenage years, but it was more situational, like when a child grew up and had children of their own, or moved away to a different community, or entered a relationship and saw different ways to do things. And this kind of came to a crossroads where, as adult children began to reclaim their autonomy, to maybe set boundaries, to maybe choose different paths and talk about it, parental capacity to respond to that really varied. We heard from some people whose parents were able to maybe listen or change course or admit error, and others were not. They expected that compliance still well into adulthood. And the only levers they knew to achieve that were coercive in some extent, maybe emotionally or relationally coercive. So we heard from a number of people who are experiencing inauthentic connection, where adult children said, look, I can't be honest with my parents. I can't tell them about this decision I've made. I can't talk to them about this because it will fracture the relationship. Or from parents who were really confused. Why now in their 30s are my children going low contact with me or no contact? Like, why can I not see my grandchildren? And so a lot of painful, confusing, complicated relational dynamics. And unfortunately, the people who maybe most need to address these to try and listen and learn new ways of doing things are least equipped to do that because they've been set in these patterns of authority and compliance and have expectations for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kelsey, is there anything you would add?
Yeah, I think these patterns that we've observed kind of come down to having a lot of parents who are encouraged by these resources to avoid connection in some cases, to be told, like, don't bend over backwards to be understanding with your child, basically. A lot of these resources will kind of say things like, well, your impulse is going to be to give your children a pass, to be permissive. Your impulse is going to be to give sin a pass in your child. And actually, you need to do these things. You need to be on high alert all the time. looking for signs of sin or idolatry in your children. Sometimes the language is really quite forceful in terms of like
Yes.
what kind of sin you're supposed to be looking for in this toddler in front of you. And you end up with parents who are like afraid of being too compassionate or afraid of being empathetic with their child. And down the road, how do you can't really get that back, right? Like you can't reconstruct that damage that's been done. I mean, I think a lot of families have experienced healing. So I don't want to say that this does irreversible damage and those are just destroyed forever. But
Sure.
I do think that there has been real loss. There's been real loss. And parents have lost the opportunity to connect with their children as children. And in some cases, I've been told that like children are almost like pre-humans, like not even really worth trying to connect with or understand. If your
Right.
child is having a hard time, it's because their sin nature and their selfishness is just ruling them. Like their foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. This idea that it's just foolishness, it's not worth trying to connect with. And so when I read these interviews back that we did with people and the hard relationships that they're dealing with now, I can't help but think about those dynamics between parent and child as young children and just the lost opportunity for connection between those people.
Yeah, this hits something really close to home because my son is super awesome. And he's super hard. He has ADHD. He has like just a variety of kind of mental health issues. And like I kid you not, last night he was literally fighting with me in his sleep as he was sleepwalking, and I was trying to get him to go back to bed. He knew it was me. He didn't know what was going on, but he was fighting me. And I'm just like, I have to fight my son in his sleep to get him to do stuff. And I have not, I think I've spanked him and I did it with my hand. I don't know. I could probably count on one hand the amount of times when he was young and there was some kind of dangerous thing. He pushed his sister off something and it's like, you can't do that. You have to get the point kind of thing, right? It's like, what is going on? Like if I just let you do this, you're going to kill someone or you're going to kill yourself or your sister. Or your sisters. That's kind of like this sense, like, and it's exhausting because on the one hand, like my wife, like they are more similar in how they express themselves and how they're willing to say what's on their minds. And they just go at it sometimes. And it's like, I'm like sitting here, like, what do we do with the kid like this? Who obviously has so much potential, so much energy, so much goodness in him, and also has this like really, really difficult side of him that is going to fight with everything and push against everything. I'll go, what is it? Like the compliant child? I mean, they used to have some word, that they would talk about the what is it? Something child. I'm forgetting. It was like a Dobson thing. And now I'm
Strong-willed?
Strong-willed. Yes, that's what it was. Yeah. The strong-willed child. And how do you break the will or whatever it is that you do? And it's like, I don't want to break the will. I just want to kind of get him to act a little nicer.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm not really trying to break my son. I'm just trying to shape him to be a decent person. Yeah. I don't know. What do we do with that now? Like the Dobson would say, or these, they would say, hey, go and, spank them or discipline them or get the sin out of them. What's the alternative? What do we do with something like that you guys have found in your research?
I mean, I just want to affirm that like parenting is hard. Like it's hard and it is triggering and it brings up all kinds of things unexpectedly for parents, I think.
Speaking of, I have a knock on my door. Excuse me.
No worries.
So I just want to like affirm that and say that there are times when I am reading one of these parenting books written by someone like James Dobson, and I think to myself, this seems like someone who is finding parenting really hard and is sort of asking the question, who sinned that this is so hard? Like this, who sinned that this is hard? Is it me? Is it my child? Is it my parents? Whose sin is at fault? What can I point to and be justifiably angry and irate at. And a lot of these books answer the child. They're being selfish, they're being manipulative, and they give that parental anger and frustration a place to land, like a righteous place to land. When I think sometimes the answer is just, no one, it's just hard, like no one, it's just hard. There are multiple people with free will in relationship here who are struggling to connect with each other, who are struggling to agree about something, or are struggling to understand each other. And that's so hard. And especially when you bring in things like neurodivergence, it's just hard. And some of these resources have one answer to offer. It's your child's sin. It doesn't matter if they're neurodivergent. I mean, most of these books don't even have that vocabulary. It doesn't matter if they're disabled. It doesn't matter if they're sick. It doesn't matter if they're hungry or tired. Just the most important thing is for you to enforce your parental authority and for them to be obedient. If you can make that happen, it will fix the problem. And that's the only answer that it has to offer. Very, very rarely do we find a book that is just kind of willing to admit, like, it's just hard. I'm sorry. And it feels unfair, but some kids have more willingness to push against their parents than others. And that's also hard. And it feels unfair. And sometimes these resources take advantage of that fact and say, you've probably seen these other compliant children who can sit through a whole church service nicely and quietly. It's possible. You too can force your child to do that. And these resources take advantage of the diversity of children, the diversity of adults, all of those things to sort of trick parents into thinking that a one-size-fits-all compliance is possible for young children, when that we just don't have any reason to believe that's the case realistically.
Yeah. And I think that really speaks to what you shared too, speaks to how triggering parenting can be, right? Like it can stir things up in a parent, whether they're able to articulate it or not, like the reactivity that can come up. And I think many mainstream evangelical parenting resources do not speak to that. The parent is almost equated with a godlike figure. And so there's a dehumanization of children, but sometimes there's an incidental dehumanization of parents as well. There's very little space for a parent to consider, what is this bringing up in me, to maybe revisit the vulnerability of their own childhood, or for Christian parents to say, what does it look like to lead, perhaps is a helpful word, in the pattern of Jesus that says, I bear some of my child's burdens. I serve them. And I think some of these resources would be really uncomfortable with that kind of language because it's child-centric. Like, what about the authority? What about the behavior? But to sort of say, these are opportunities for parents to grow in the fruit of the Spirit, to cultivate charity and forbearance and long-suffering and patience as a Christian maturity in themselves, as they are helping alongside a child who, if we believe in the goodness of God's design, God in his wisdom has designed children to develop from immaturity to maturity. That's not a flaw, that they are born immature and incapable of perfect behavior. That is part of the human pattern for development. And so one thing we hope in this book, we don't give parenting advice in our book, but we would love to free parents up from some of that, the heavy pressure of these frameworks that say everybody's got to be behaving. It's not just the children. The parents also have to jump pretty high to reach these ideas of what they need to obey, and to stay instead an invitation to a journey that perhaps it's not about behavior in the end goal. Perhaps it's about human beings entrusted to parental care for a short time in community together. And really those kind of paradigm shifts do have a lot of downstream implications in how parents approach even the kind of encounters you're describing. If it's about getting a desired behavior, or if it's about connecting with a child, or coming alongside them and encouraging them. Those are just going to have different trajectories.
Yeah, I completely get that. And it's like, I feel like I'm at this weird, angle between, I know that the way that much of my generation was raised probably had a lot of flaws in it and created a lot of damage, and even damage, between kids and parents, between kids and church, authority figures, things like that, right? Especially for those who didn't have a compliant personality. My daughter, Noelle, she will comply, even though internally she's like the one who's going to like comply. And then one day she's just gone because she doesn't believe it. Oh, but she's not going to say it. She's just going to get through life because she's a practical person. But my other two, they'll fight you and they'll go through it with you. And it's like, and I don't want to, I feel stuck between that pattern of parenting and then like this new age. I don't know if you new age, but it feels like we don't discipline our children. We don't punish them. We see what they want to do all the time. It's like, that doesn't even make sense. Like you just said it, they're not mature. So by definition, much of what they're going to want to do is probably not going to result in the best thing. So you have to help mitigate it and work it. So I feel stuck, but the same core thing is here of fear. What's going to happen with my kids? How are they going to turn out? My wife will be like, our son is either going to be in prison or he's going to be like a billionaire or something like that, right? And it's like, well, let's not make those the two options. But I get it. Like, it's just like this, it's incessant. It's so persistent. You can't be more persistent than him. But it's like looking at this and the fear is there. And it's like what they promised was, look, you'll get obedience now, and then you'll get salvation later.
Eternal stakes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about that for a little bit. How does that help and or hurt this situation, thinking about those future kind of stakes? Is it even appropriate? What do you think?
I mean, the use of high stakes, sort of future catastrophizing is like, it's a feature of these resources, right? If it's, in a lot of cases, it's your children are going to be criminals, right? Like, I mean, like in the 70s, that was the thing. In the 60s, the book The Cross and the Switchblade came out. Incredibly popular book.
Yes.
A couple of parenting books cite that one, actually, or its author, David Wilkerson. And that becomes this boogeyman for a lot of evangelical parents. Like, I'm going to lose my child to drugs and crime. And so that's really an effective tool that some of these authors use. You know, you must teach your child to be obedient. You must, kill that rebellious spirit early so that they don't go down that path. But then there's also the eternal stakes of, if you don't force your child to respect you and your authority, they will never be able to respect God and God's authority. It's this relationship between parent and child is the laboratory where you prove that you can follow God. And that, I mean, I understand why. I understand why that is effective. I don't think it's helpful because, again, it saddles parents with this impossible task that you simply cannot guarantee that your child is going to be a Christian in the future. And there are all kinds of things that we know now about risk for future criminal activity, right? And in fact, authoritarian parenting practices are sometimes linked to those things. So they're just, it's really not all that helpful. It's not really grounded in reality. It's pretty purely just capitalizing on anxiety and fear.
Yeah. And from a Christian perspective, it is even out of alignment with what we see in Scripture, right? God himself does not guarantee compliance in his children have free will to rebel. And we see this even in when Scripture uses parental imagery, like Jesus's story of the two sons. And there is a prodigal son who demands his inheritance, basically says, I wish you were dead, to his father, and leaves. And there's another son who is angry about his father's generosity. And so we see these images, and I think those are kind of helpful, iconic pictures of human responses to God as Father and God's generosity as Father. And we see this throughout the narrative of the people of God in Israel as well. Or you can even look at the narrative of accounts of godly leaders who had rebellious sons. You have Samuel the priest. That's the instance there that comes to mind. I don't think we need to proof text to support this point. I think it's a fair point that makes sense to say, yeah, you just can't guarantee outcomes in the life of another human being. Humans don't have that kind of omnipotence over anyone, let alone their children. And often those attempts backfire. But to present that as a Christian goal is especially at odds with what we see in the narrative of the biblical story, where it is individuals who relate to God and are offered that choice. So I do think these are significant myths because they play into a longing, but it's simply not true. As much as we would like it as parents, it's simply not true. Our children are separate human beings. They don't belong to us in that way. They're not ours to control. They are, and I always lean into the language of they're entrusted to our care for a short time. Yeah. But that's it. We don't get to determine outcomes.
Yeah, that makes, I agree with that. And it makes perfect sense to me because that just seems so obvious from how life is lived out that you don't get to control outcomes. You can make your choices, you have free will, and that you can make your choices, but you can't control the consequences of those choices, and you can't control how other people are going to react to those choices. And it's we have this weird view of free will, distortion, we're going to be able to impose our will on other people. And even that, if we can do it by force, it still doesn't work because it doesn't get their heart. It doesn't capture their heart. And I agree. I don't want my children to be obedient to me at cost of relationship with them down the road. That would be that would be a tragedy. So if there's a way to get away from that, that's what I'm going to choose it. That's what I'm going to choose to do. I would love to kind of think about this idea of, so with parenting, we've talked about the origins of it. What are some of the most harmful myths that you found? And I think we probably hit some of them, but even if there's ones we haven't hit or you want to expand on ones we have, what are the most harmful myths that this kind of industry and machine of Christian parenting putting out moneymaker, what are the myths that this perpetuated, the most harmful myths?
There are a lot. I'll pick, the one I'll start with is this belief that parental authority is the first principle, is that parental authority is the most important thing that must be defended at all costs, that your child is going to be constantly trying to usurp your authority and that you need to assert yourself at all times. And this shows up in James Dobson's work. It also shows up in books by people like Chuck Swindoll, who you might not think of as a parenting writer. He's kind of a radio pastor, megachurch pastor, but he really goes to bat for parental authority. It's going to be the thing that your children try to tear down. It's going to be something that the world around you tries to tear down, and you need to defend it. This is one reason why a journalist named Ann Holbert refers to James Dobson as a parent-centered parenting expert, because everything hinges on the parental authority, parental experience, parental desire, parental will, and everything gets filtered through that, which can have some really terrible outcomes. One of the terrible outcomes is that parents who really internalize this idea find themselves in a constant battle of wills with their child, just constantly viewing their child as a combatant. It puts you in this adversarial relationship with a child that I think there are marriage books that do this too, right? That the ones that really lean really hard into the husband is the head of the household. If you really internalize that, it squashes the possibility of mutuality, of cooperative problem solving, of partnership, of authentic connection and relationship, all those things. If you sell someone on the idea that their authority is absolute and that it's constantly under attack by whoever is being talked about, that just sets you up for a really broken relationship. And a lot of these books talk about parental authority in this way, sometimes surprisingly so, from people you wouldn't necessarily expect. And you sort of wonder what this looked like in their day-to-day lives? Like how were they mitigating this? Because I can't believe that was setting up the people writing this for good connection either, but it's hard to know.
Yeah, I would say that combined with a little element of it that really taught parents they were acting as God or in an intermediary role to mediate somehow between their children and God. That is a very problematic myth, both for how families are relating day to day and spiritual formation of children down the road. And the one, though, I think has the most deep-rooted problems is these things combined with the idea that corporal punishment is a biblical mandate. And we don't give parenting advice in our book, but that's one thing we're willing to say, look, to Christian parents directly. Like, this is not a command. This is not a requirement. You do not need to spank your small children. And I think saying that can help free people up to evaluate the evidence and think critically about the practice as a choice, rather than this sense of like, spare the rod, spoil the child, God requires me to spank, any number of things that again and again Christian parents are hearing, such that, I often hear from parents who are like, I don't want to spank. It doesn't feel right to me. Like my intuition is saying not to, but I'm worried if I don't, what will happen? Or I don't know what else to do. Or some people have been asked to leave their church communities if they don't practice corporal punishment. So there really is to use the language of like stronghold, this really is a hill some Christian experts and parents are willing to die on, that they think, I can't let go of this in my parenting. And it's so unfortunate because, yes, there can be people who say, I was spanked a handful of times, I turned out fine, and move on. However, there are many who speak to how destructive this practice was in their lives as adult children. We have good research now that shows the destructive nature of this practice. We can have good conversations about how this practice is not ethical. This is not how we treat other human beings. And we can talk about the very real danger that this, as these resources present the right way to spank, is a recipe for grooming, for abuse. And that's when you read resource after resource, when you read the steps, you see it. I don't think that's what people are necessarily intending, but that is what is happening. So this is a practice that as a Christian community, I think we can just be done with. We can dispel the myth and say, we do not need to do this anymore. We do not need to defend this anymore. We can acknowledge the harm and attempt repair instead.
Yeah, I like that. And I guess the tension that brings up in my mind, and not that you guys are experts on this and you need to be experts on this, is at some point, if someone is non-compliant enough with society, there will be force used against them at some level, right? Even to the place, right, if they are violent, there's violence used against them to stop them. And is there anything like that and again, I'm not saying that you're experts in the how do you raise your children? I know, and you may be, but I'm saying in this book, it's this issue that you're looking at, which is really important to look at. But I guess just love to hear your intuition on this and the thoughts like, where is force appropriate at some point, right? Just maybe that's it. Maybe where is force appropriate, do you think, physical force appropriate is it ever appropriate? And if so, when, in trying to control your children?
Well, I think there are a couple of questions in there that need to be answered first. So when we're talking about physical force, if we're talking about the kind of spanking that is advocated for in books like Shepherding a Child's Heart, that is not, I'm using physical force to stop you from doing something harmful. That is, you have done something wrong. You have left the circle of blessing. I'm going to inflict pain upon you in response to that, because I believe that's what the Bible commands me to do. It is very spiritualized. The pain is the point, right? In a lot of these resources, it is this, you have to make it hurt enough because it's the only way they'll learn. It's a weird combination of spiritualization and behaviorism James Dobson is pretty behaviorist in his orientation. He doesn't spiritualize the spanking as much as others do. He would just sort of say, this is the only way a 2-year-old can learn this. You have to inflict pain, enough pain to upset them. You can't use
logic. You can't. It has to be,
It has to be upsetting. It has to be very painful. And that is how you teach. You teach through the pain. That's a very different question than at what point can I restrain my child? I mean, there are all kinds of resources that you can find in the mainstream that are very clear that if your child is doing something that's harming someone else, you should physically restrain your child. And these writers would say that's an ethical decision.
Right.
And in those situations, the point is not, I am going to inflict pain upon you to teach you something. It is, I am stopping you. I am picking you up and holding you and removing you from the situation. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very different thing
it's important.
Than the conversation about defending what we call liturgized spanking. These are entirely different.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, they're just two very different things. And when you remove that conversation, which is that's kind of the hill that a lot of evangelicals die on, is sort of like, we need to defend this practice of spiritualized spanking because and it's a very modern thing. It's a new thing. It is not something that Christians have practiced throughout history. I also think it's worth mentioning here that the freedom of parents to hit their children is something that we observe across time and across different cultures. In many cases, that right of parents to hit children has not been conceived of as a good thing commanded by God. In many cases, that has been understood as you have the right to do that to your property. And as the way that we think about things like human rights and social justice has changed over time, people have changed their view about that, as we have on a number of ethical and social justice issues. For a lot of Christians, that feels perilous, that feels uncomfortably progressive. But I think it's important to name that and say, in the same way that our thinking about the ethics of slavery has changed, the ethics of how we treat children is changing also. And I think that's okay. And I would argue that it's coming more into alignment with the way Jesus views children as full human beings who can come to Jesus as children. So anyway, that's a very long answer to your question, but I think it's important to pull these apart and talk about the big differences between when someone asks a question like, can I swap my 1-year-old's hand if they try to touch the stove? That's a different question than, should I take my 7-year-old into a room and inflict pain upon them until they cry the right way to show that they are contrite? Yeah. Two different things. I still think that the answer is, it's not ethical to inflict harm upon a human being to teach a lesson. That's not a good decision. But those are still two different questions. And I think I want parents to hear us when we say, we are not here to shame parents for the decisions that they've made. We want to help think through these questions because they all get swirled together in this conversation about, if you're anti-spanking, you're pro no discipline, letting your children do whatever they want. And that's not true either.
Yeah, those are not the two options. It's not spank. Yes. And it's often presented as that. Either you spank in this way or your children run wild. And there are a number of ethical options in between. I think we would also like to untether this idea from it being particularly biblical and say, look, if you as a parent want to choose spanking, you own that choice. That's not because God wants you to do it. It's because you have thought through it and said, this is what I am going to do. And it's worth saying in your original question, I don't know of any study that's been done, but I would wager that if you go talk to the majority of people who are incarcerated, they will say they were spanked as children. This is not necessarily preventative. If people are, if people are worried in the future of force, yes, force is a consequence. And it's why I think when we talk about the Proverbs, because a lot of people will bring up the rod Proverbs, the wise principle there is that parents are attentive to discipline, which biblically speaking includes teaching, correction, instruction. It's discipleship. Wise parents are attentive to do that day in and day out. Negligent ones don't. When we reduce that down to parents have to hit their toddlers and preschoolers on the bottom with their hands or a tool to get them to comply, we have missed the invitation to wisdom, which is discipleship. It's not hit into compliance. So it's unfortunate because a lot of these resources offer bad advice and also leave parents bereft of healthy advice or wise advice that could help them. So there's probably much we could say on that topic, but our goal really is to free parents up and say there is tremendous freedom for the Christian parent regarding methodology. The only direct instruction given to Christian parents in the New Testament, repeated twice, is fathers, do not embitter or provoke your children to anger. In Ephesians 6, it's followed up with, but bring them up in the instruction and discipline of the Lord. And all the relational one anothering commands and principles in the New Testament apply to parents and children. Love your neighbor. Be kind, be forbearing, be patient. All of these apply. So there's a wealth of resources there for Christian parents who say, what compass do I have if it's not spank into compliance? That say, well, the same way we relate to others, we relate to children. We look to the pattern and example of Jesus and try and follow him in that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I would love for you to address the idea that people have later on in life where someone has disciplined their children because this is what they knew, right?
Yeah.
Like growing up, this is what they knew.
Yeah.
And now they're like, we did it right. And our children they're not in relationship with us. They're estranged from us. What's the move there? What do you recommend for parents that have, and again, I'm not asking you to be psychologists necessarily. I'm asking you just from your research to speak from your heart on what's the move that from your research that parents that have seen this, what might they do to make some repair attempts there?
Yeah, it's such a hard and painful piece of this, picking up the pieces. This betrayal, it's why we reach for the language of betrayal. These promises betrayed entire families. Yes, in many ways, the children experienced the brunt of it, but in many ways, parents were both victims and victimizers. Sometimes, yes, abusive people were drawn to these teachings, but sometimes parents were doing what they could with what they knew, with what they were told. They were betrayed by these promises. And
that's what I would say about my parents. I mean, they weren't abused, but this is what they were taught to do.
Yeah, and
everyone around them did it.
Yes, and it's the community enabled it. And so first I would say there's grace for parents too. The reality here isn't that if parents got it wrong, there's a cosmic spanking awaiting for them or there's swift punishment because they screwed up, Like there is grace for parents too. Like I hope we can try and hold multiple truths here at the same time, that there can be very real negative impact. There can be very real consequences to these parenting practices, particularly if parents applied them faithfully. That can sometimes look like permanently lost relationship. That is the reality of the loss that can happen. And there is a lot to grieve and be angry about there. Like there's not a guarantee to say, well, do this and you can get relationship back with your adult child. So there's a lot to grieve and be angry about. However, I do think the first step on this path is naming the harm, is identifying what happened to begin any process of attempting repair. And that involves listening to adult children in a posture that as much as possible is not fragile or defensive, that is able to truly listen. And again, it's sad that so many of these resources left parents not practicing that from childhood on. For many, it's a new thought to be able to listen, to hear, not to control or not to change someone's mind, to just listen and let someone have a different viewpoint or a different experience. And in the third part of our book, we offer kind of some open-ended suggestions to parents to maybe get curious about their own history, their own family of origin, what drew them to these teachings in the first place, to maybe seek out qualified licensed mental health counselor who has experience in religious trauma or in family of origin. Topics might be a help here, or a spiritual director or a trusted pastor, to kind of get curious about what was going on in them and to seek out tools that will really help with empathetic listening. Because I think that's a really important piece, to hear what it was like for a child, to hear what it was like for a sibling who maybe siblings in the same home had different experiences, to be able to learn how to express what it was like as a parent without expectations, because that's a piece of it. A lot of parents who are trained up in this can come to this and say, well, what's the hack here? now that we're, focused on the family as a whole section of their website now of how to deal with estrangement, so there's an understandable desire to say, well, what lever do I pull here? Because I want this important relationship, but it may be a complicated, difficult, grief-filled process. In hopeful news, we do hear from families who navigate this. And what we hear from adult children is their parents' ability to listen, to apologize if needed, was hugely significant. That was almost a huge piece. And many adult children are longing to hear that. They express that desire. So I think that's a big piece of being able to move forward. And again, it's at odds with a lot of this messaging in the books where a parent never changes their mind. They must be consistent. They must choose the principles. So I think too, it requires sometimes some deconstruction because of the ways these ideas were wrapped up with faith principles and promises. And that can be scary for parents, particularly in communities that value certainty. So maybe it helps to hear other Christians say, that can be a necessary part of the faith journey to have some space to deconstruct and re-examine and reconsider, because that seems to be a necessary piece of this for a lot of families as well. What would you add, Kelsey?
I think that's huge. What you were just saying about the willingness to listen and consider that what you did was not right or not prescribed. The problem with trying to pull apart some of this advice is that it was sold to so many parents as the right way. This is the right way. This is the way that God commands. This is the way that will help save American society. I mean, I've said that a couple times now, but a lot of these books really are quite political in orientation, looking out and saying, you're going to fix the world. This is a collective political project.
Yes.
Parents signed on to be a part of that, and some of them with a lot of fervor and a lot of certainty. And I think that brings a lot of pain for parents. I think it can also it can almost call into question parts of their worldview. That's hard work. And I think for a lot of parents, it just feels impossible. It feels like a bridge too far. And I think that ability or willingness to re-examine that part of one's worldview is really important here. And I think it's one that I, as someone writing this book, want to say it's a willingness that I also want to have in the future for myself, for my kids. It's hard. It's really, really hard. But when you have generations of parents who are made promises and encouraged to do things this way, the biblical way, the right way, I think it's hard to backpedal, really hard to go back on that.
Yes.
And so I just think that's a really important piece of this. It's hard. And
yeah, it's a very important piece of it. And it's on the one hand, you want to honor God, desperately, if you really care. And you want to help your kids. If you care about that stuff, you want to honor God and you want to help your kids to know God and love God. And it's it gets forgotten that our kids are just little humans and they're just like us. They have these internal worlds and they're trying to figure things out and they get afraid and they get anxious and they get, about different stuff, but it's the same basic patterns and same basic categories. It's how you grow, and they are going to become people with their own kids or families or whatever they choose. And they're going to have a choice at that point within our society to keep you in or keep you out. And I think that I do think parents need to shift in their minds hey, this is not just a little, this isn't just my little property, this little thing that I'm trying to control and shape. This is a little person that I'm trying to influence and help and love and hopefully maintain relationship with for the rest of my life. I couldn't imagine not having a relationship with my kids. Yeah. In the future, that would be absolute. I mean, it's beyond even it's a little bit beyond imagination in some ways. And I, just looking at it from where I'm at now, with my relationship with my kids. So it's it's so hard. What, I guess my last question is, what would be the most important thing if you were to summarize this? What is the most important message that you're trying to get out to parents and children who are reading this? I'm assuming it'll be mostly parents or just people that have, Not that it's a parenting book necessarily, right? But people that have kids are going to want to read this and think about it. What is your hope? What is your prayer? What's the most important message you'd want to say?
I want people to come away from this book feeling free to respond to the children in front of them and build relationships with their kids on their terms without feeling like they need to look to this other authority telling them how to respond, telling them how to navigate that relationship, or offering promises. I think there is so much more freedom in relationship than these books have led parents to believe. That's what I'm hoping parents come away with, is the freedom to then go out. And I mean, I think every parent at some point wants some help, wants some advice, right? And the other insidious thing about these books is that they also constrain parents' ability to go looking for help other places than more Christian resources. There are resources out there for all manner of challenges that parents face. And I think feeling free to go look elsewhere, see what other voices help you. Some of the most helpful voices for me have been resources given to me by people that they're not Christian, they're not faith oriented in any way, but they have been helpful in giving me a vocabulary for dealing with one of my kids in a particular way that has helped me see something that I didn't understand before. And I even hesitate to give the names out of those because they're helpful for me because I'm me and my child is my child. But once I felt like, okay, I don't need to go look for the biblical way to do this, I can just try to understand this relationship. It was so freeing. And that hasn't made it easy, but it has helped me be less afraid. It has helped me feel more free and feel more capable. And I think it's also helped me love my children better.
That's so good.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I would say we wrote this book with like three audiences in mind. One is just people interested in the evangelical subculture, academics, historians, scholars of religion. And hopefully for them, it sheds light on this subculture, how these practices formed people, particularly for like mental health counselors, pastors, others who might not be familiar with these resources. We hope that it's just useful information. So I hope that's their takeaway. For people actively parenting, I so resonate with what Kelsey's saying. Yes, we hope it frees people up and empowers them. We have a appendix that has kind of a metric to say, here are some questions to ask yourself to maybe evaluate who do you want to listen to? Like, do you want to read this book? Like, do you want to keep this book around? To kind of green flags for resources, red flags for resources. So we really would love to return agency to parents to say, you have your individual children with individual temperaments. You have your own temperaments. God has entrusted these human beings into your care. You have a lot of freedom there to create a family culture and parent in ways that suit all of you. And then for people reflecting back on their own experiences, for parents and adult children, I would hope that they feel seen, that they feel their experience is represented well, that they feel in a way that someone is bearing witness to this, because I think talking about past events can feel really isolating. And for some people, it comes with a lot of shame and grief. And so I hope there's a sense of acknowledgement there that can be a companion to them in those really tender places. And for everyone, for people of faith, I would hope this work is an invitation to meet God on fresh terms, because I do think a lot of these ideas are wrapped up in views about God and what he is like as an authoritarian, punitive father. Gosh, we really would love to set people free from that and invite them to consider his love of people, his delight in people, his desire to connect with people and care for people, all these things that kind of mirror some of the themes we've been talking about. And that they would feel seen and loved by God in some small way as they read this book. So a lot of hopes for a lot of different people. But we're just thankful for anyone who's reading and jumping in with us in this book.
Well, thank you guys so much for spending some time with me and talking about your latest book, Myth of Good Christian Parenting. It's been great to have this conversation. Super enlightening. And thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us. This was so fun to talk with you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. How can people, is there a preferred vendor for the book? And how can people get connected with you guys? And do you have any other projects coming up?
Yeah, so you can pre-order The Myth of Good Christian Parenting anywhere. I think if you order from Brazos Press, from the Baker website, I think it's at a 40% discount right now, so there's that. But Amazon pre-orders help us as well, because if you order
Awesome.
from a place like Amazon, you can leave a review, which also helps the book. So truly, wherever is great. I don't know when this is being released, but this particular week we are recruiting for our launch team. And we'll give links for the show notes for all of this. We both have Substacks, and we're posting constantly on all of our socials, as one does when they have a book coming out.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can find us both on Substack, a lot on Instagram. That's where a lot of the activity and discussion around our work is. A lot of my writing is available on the Christianity Today website. You can go track that down there as well. Marissa, what would you add?
Yeah, we're across social media. We'll send along the links for your show notes. If you pre-order, the book comes out October 14th, but if you pre-order, we have a couple freebie downloads that make the Christian case against spanking, kind of look at some of those passages and
Nice.
and offer those. So if that's of interest to you, make sure to snag that. And then, yeah, we're so thrilled for this book to be in your hands. It's available ebook, print, and audiobook.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. We'll put all that in the show notes. You guys, make sure you're checking out the book and checking out Kelsey McGinnis and Marissa Burt, all their websites and the things that are going on in their socials. Get involved in the conversations, and we care about you guys. Thank you for coming to join us, and we appreciate you. And until next time, take care and God bless.